Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the story of one of the most formidable, ruthless, and honestly, successful emperors in Roman history. We're talking about a man who was crowned as a child, ruled as a total puppet, and then clawed his way to absolute power to become Basil II, the Bulgar Slayer. So that's the big question, right? How does that happen? We start with this young guy who inherits the throne of the massive Byzantine Empire, but he holds absolutely zero real power. His journey from being just a figurehead to an absolute monarch, well, it's one of the most dramatic tales in all of medieval history. And this really lays out the transformation perfectly. On one side, you've got the young Basil. He's basically a placeholder, a pawn for others. But on the other side, that's the man he became. The longest reigning emperor in Roman history, a brilliant administrator who left the treasury literally overflowing with gold, and a conqueror who pushed the empire's borders to their widest point in centuries. You see, for the first 13 years of his reign, starting way back in 976, Basil was emperor in name only. He was completely overshadowed by these powerful court officials and generals who basically treated him like their puppet. He had the crown, but they had the power. Thanks to this court historian, Michael Pacellos, we actually have a really vivid picture of the guy. And what's so interesting is that he was completely unlike what you'd expect from a Byzantine emperor. He was short, stocky, with this booming laugh that would shake his whole body. He couldn't care less about the fancy robes and ceremonies of the court. At heart, he was a soldier, not some scholar or stuffy courtier. And that soldier emperor wasn't made in a palace. Oh no. His true reign really began in the crucible of a brutal, decade-long civil war that nearly cost him everything. I mean, think about this. For over a decade, his throne was under constant threat from his own powerful generals, these men from the wealthy, land-owning aristocracy. First, one rebels. Then the general he sends to defeat that guy also rebels. The whole empire was just tearing itself apart from the inside. So to survive, Basil had to think way outside the box. He made this absolutely game-changing alliance with Prince Vladimir of Kiev. And this was a move that was just shocking at the time. He offered his own sister in marriage to this so-called barbarian ruler in exchange for 6,000 elite warriors. These axe-wielding Rus fighters became the legendary Varangian Guard, the emperor's fiercely loyal and terrifyingly effective personal army. Now get this. This was the advice given to Basil by the defeated rebel Skleros, the very guy who tried to overthrow him, and Basil took it to heart. This ruthless political philosophy, keep your rivals weak, trust absolutely no one, and centralize all power in yourself, that would define the rest of his reign. He had learned his lesson in the hardest way imaginable. So, with his throne finally secure, Basil turned his full, undivided attention to the empire's #1 external threat, the powerful Bulgarian Empire, led by the very formidable Tsar Samuel. And this wasn't some quick campaign, not at all. This became his lifelong obsession. We're talking year after year after year, Basil personally led his armies into the Bulgarian mountains, fighting a grinding, brutal war of attrition. It required just incredible persistence and a singular iron-willed focus. The war reached its horrifying climax in 1014 at the Battle of Kilian. Basil brilliantly trapped the entire Bulgarian army and won a stunning victory. But what he did next is what cemented his place in history. He ordered the thousands of captured soldiers to be blinded. A standard Byzantine punishment for rebels, sure, but done on a scale that is just terrifying to imagine. As the story goes, when Tsar Samuel saw his blinded army stumbling back home, he suffered a stroke and died on the spot. This act of calculated cruelty just broke the back of the Bulgarian resistance. By 1018, all of Bulgaria was conquered. For the first time in 400 years, the empire's border was back on the Danube River, and Basil had a new name, Bulgaroktonos, the Bulgar Slayer. But here's the thing. Basil's genius wasn't just limited to the battlefield. Back in Constantinople, he was an equally shrewd and ruthless administrator, and he was determined to make sure no general could ever challenge the throne again. So he systematically went after the power of the very same wealthy, land-owning elites who had tried to overthrow him. Remember them? Well, Basil never forgot. He forced them to return lands they'd seized illegally and introduced this radical new tax, the alle elenion, which basically made the rich responsible for paying the tax debts of their poorer neighbors. And what was the result of all this? How about this number? 14.4 million.
That's how many numismata, solid gold coins, were sitting in the imperial treasury when he died. It was a staggering fortune. Through his tough management and constant warfare, he had made the empire richer than it had been in generations.
So, what's the final verdict on this guy? An emperor who reigned longer than any other in Roman history, a soldier who despised luxury and never even married. How do we sum him up?
Well, as you can see here, it really depends on who you ask, doesn't it? In Greece, he's often remembered as a national hero, the man who restored the empire. But in Bulgaria, well, understandably, he's remembered as a hated conqueror, a symbol of national destruction. One nation's greatest hero is very often another's greatest villain.
At the moment of his death in 1025, the empire that Basil had rebuilt was at its absolute zenith. It was vast, it was rich, it was feared by all its neighbors. But, and this is a huge but, it was an empire built and maintained almost entirely by the singular will and incredible ability of one man. A man who, critically, left no children to succeed him. And that's really the final thought, isn't it? Basil's successors, they just weren't up to the task. They couldn't maintain the heights he achieved, and within decades, the empire began to unravel. It leaves us with a massive question. How stable is any system, any company, or any nation that relies so heavily on a single extraordinary individual?